You're listening to Big Ray's Garage Grind.
I want to bring awareness and my voice to something that's meaningful and purposeful, more than just who's the best football player or who's the best football team.
The intersection between life, football, and mental health.
When you need help and you ask for help, you're operating from a position of power. When you need help and you don't ask for help, that's the weakness.
Now, here's your host, Seahawks legend, Ray Roberts.
What is up? What is up? What is up, fam? This is Big Ray with Big Ray's Garage Grind, brought to you by the Mindful Therapy Group. And this is our first ever mental health live edition. So for our recording, we have a live audience here today, and hopefully we'll hear from them a little bit later. But I am joined today by a couple of individuals from the Mindful Therapy Group. And so I'm going to give them a little bit of an opportunity to introduce themselves before we get started with the show.
I'm Derek Crane, co-founder and CEO of Mindful Therapy Group.
And I'm Nick Norman. I'm the clinical program manager at Mindful Therapy Group.
Yeah, so when I do these podcasts, I try to keep a current theme to them. So they're not just kind of regurgitating my story and you're hearing it over and over and over and you're like, okay, Ray, we've heard that enough. And so I think this is the perfect timing for our live one and to have experts here that can speak to some of these topics, because the things that we want to cover today, or at least attempt to cover today, is, and this is one of the things that really helps me embrace this whole mental health journey, is the difference between mental health, mental wellness, and mental illness. And so sometimes when you understand the difference between the three of those, it kind of helps you destigmatize the whole concept, the whole space of mental health. So they're going to help us understand that a little bit today. And then with the holidays coming up, super emotional time, whether it's, you get around your family and there's kind of craziness going on sometimes, or it drums up memories of yesteryear or what have you, and you can have some emotional mental health, responses to some of that stuff. So having a plan for that is going to be important. And so those are some of the things that we want to talk to today. I have some things and stories to tell that kind of speak to how I've dealt with different things. These guys have some techniques and things we're going to give you that you can take home. So it's almost like having a mini playbook. We're here at the VMAC in the team auditorium, theater, whatever you want to call it here, meeting room. And so the idea of having a playbook is a good one. When I did therapy in Michigan, they gave us technically a playbook. It was it had all these different coping skills, all these different things to try to kind of manage your mental health. And so the way I went about it is I said, okay, I'm going to treat this like training camp. And when I got up in the morning, I practiced one of the coping techniques, and before I went to bed at night, I practiced one. So I did 2 days with this playbook. It was marked all up. I meant to bring it today, but I got nervous and anxious and forgot all about it. But it's important to have a playbook, to have a plan to do it. So the way I'd like to start is just trying to wrap our brains around those three different items around mental health, mental wellness, and mental illness. And the way I think about it, and you guys can expand on it, is that mental health is your overall state of mind. And then mental wellness is a proactive effort to maintain your mental health. And then mental illness is a diagnosis that may require therapy and that type of thing. So if you guys could speak to those three things and then what they mean in the world that you work in, and then maybe some examples of how those three different things play out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you make a great point that, for a very long time, there hasn't been a really good distinction between these in the broader culture. And so, for a long time, there's been a lot of stigma around mental health where folks wouldn't talk about it at all, because if you talk about it at all, it means we're talking about mental illness, or we're talking about something shameful. But the reality is that, just like we all have physical health and you can take care of it or not, every one of us has mental health and we can take care of it or not. And so, like you're saying, that's a much more broad, overarching definition, while mental wellness is really, like you were saying, about that proactive effort we make to take care of that mental health.
Yeah.
How would you look at Nick? Like, when we talk about mental illness, how do you see mental illness?
Yeah, and what's interesting is that I often don't even think about it in terms of mental illness anymore. Having been in the field now for 10 years and worked with clients for a long time, in my mind, a diagnosis doesn't necessarily equal an illness in my mind anymore. Um, because the reality is that mental health struggles are universal. We all struggle. We've all experienced traumatic events at some point in our lives. And so, a diagnosis of major depressive disorder is not the end of the world. And it doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. A diagnosis is a description. And that description helps us figure out what to do next in order to take care of ourselves.
Yeah.
And so I definitely have had my own little shift in terms of how I think about that too.
Yeah, and I do think, especially for me, like for instance, like the illness part is what kept me from talking about it, because I thought it was a weakness of mine that I wasn't able to deal with what was going on, like in my life and stuff like that. And so then I didn't put it in a category of illness where if I had an illness, I'm like, well, I should probably go see someone. If I have a headache or stomach ache or break my arm or leg or whatever, you're going to go find something to address the illness. And I didn't really see it that way. And so when I retired from the NFL, I've always, I graduated from UVA, so we're a little bit like arrogant and are thinking that we're the smartest people in the room all the time. And so I thought, man, I'll retire. I know what I'm going to do and how I'm going to handle it and all this stuff. And then I just could not get off the couch. I could not get out of the bed. And I was just like, what is wrong with me? And so then I'd have to put on like this face, around my wife and my kids, that I was like this happy-go-lucky dude, because that's who I am most of the time. But man, I was struggling like big time and not knowing what to do and not wanting to share it with anybody, because I didn't want someone to look at me and think that I was crazy or something. I didn't want to have the label on me. And so, I mean, I retired in 2001. And before I got help was maybe 3 years ago, so I battled this thing for a long time until it just got to a breaking point. But then once I got to that place and started to understand that there are reasons that things happen, and the way you phrase it, or the way you think about it, or the way you try to process it or not process it, that there are reasons and that those things are happening, and there's a way to address those things to then either they may still happen, but you can mitigate it and deal with it, or you figure out how to get past it and get over it. And so I think the whole idea around mental illness, especially in our population too, like in our culture, like it's just this kind of a stigma around it that nobody wants you to know. Like I work at Special Olympics, and even the work I do with Special Olympics, we have to overcome those stigmas, that your child may have a intellectual disability. And so we address some of the same types of stigmas as we were with the mental health stuff.
I think the biggest fear about mental health is the worry about being shamed, the worry about being labeled. And it's hard for people to pick up that phone and make that call because they're worried about getting that label. What if they do have a diagnosis and they get a diagnosis that they don't want to hear? You mentioned major depression disorder or bipolar disorder, or, having some kind of psychotic features. Maybe you have, you're diagnosed with bipolar disorder with psychotic features, and they're worried about that shame. So Nick, thinking about people carrying that fear with them, how do you help people navigate that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is that we have to help people recognize that a diagnosis is not an identity. And and sometimes people will cling to their diagnosis as an identity, but it's not. Like I was saying before, it's a description of this is what's going on, this is what's happening. And the reality is that our physical health and our mental health are intricately tied together. And so it may also be describing what's going on a physiological level. And so, but once you get to a diagnosis, a description of what's happening, then you can create a treatment plan, which is we now know that based on a lot of research and evidence, this is how we approach this mental health disorder to help you reach a state of stability and healthiness. And so it's a path forward. You got to know what you're dealing with before you can put a solution together.
What about this idea that you get that label and that label's on you forever? How do you reconcile that, or is that a label that you need to carry forever?
Well, can I just jump in first? So one of the things that helps me is when I was in this. So the NFL used to sponsor this program called After the Impact, and it's a home on about 5 or 6 acres in Manchester, Michigan, which is right outside of Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so that's where I found myself. I ended up there, and I needed to be there. But one of the things I did there, and I don't know if I heard this phrase in the therapy or not, but this idea like around radical acceptance. And so I said, you know what, like being depressed sometimes and having debilitating anxiety sometimes is just part of my journey. It's just part of who I am. And I'm going to just accept that versus trying to push it away. Because it felt like the more I tried to push it away, the more intense it was on me. And so then I just said, I'm just going to accept that this is part of my life. Now let me figure out what the game plan is to deal with this part of my life. Just the way I would deal with, my body's all like with the cold weather around here this week, my body's been killing me, so I've had to figure out a way to deal with that, with all the football injuries. So I can't make that pain go away from playing football. And sometimes I can't tell myself that the depression is never going to come back or the anxiety is never going to come back. And so I just accept that those are going to be parts of my life. And then I come up with a plan to deal with those things when they raise up.
Love that. Love radical acceptance. Pima Chudrin, you have Tara Brach, some of the great mindfulness people, they always talk about, things are always sort of falling apart, but they're also, they're coming together and that's happening every day long, all day, every day. And this idea of embracing pain, embracing failure, that's mindfulness.
Yeah, and I like that description that you used because the reality is that if we have an injury, if we have a chronic illness, we want to radically accept that so that we can get treatment for it. We don't do ourselves any good, for example, if we have type 2 diabetes and we're not taking care of ourselves accordingly. And so similarly with mental health, sometimes these are just episodic where it's just I'm going through this for a period of time in my life, and sometimes they are chronic. But by understanding yourself and, like you're saying, taking that radical acceptance of, okay, this is something I've got to deal with. This is part of my journey. Then you can recognize when it's happening, when it's flaring up, for example. And
it's counterintuitive, isn't it? Because the brain wants to push it away.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And like you were saying, what you resist persists.
Yeah. Well, I can remember one time at this after the Impact program, and the therapist challenged. There was 6 of us there at a time, former NFL players. And the therapist challenged all the 6 of us. Hey, when you're starting to feel your thing, I just want you to sit in it for like 5 or 10 minutes. And so you have all these big buff football players in there. They're just like, nah, we're not doing that. Like that's not gonna happen. And so she was like, no, I just really challenge you. Like if you're feeling anxiety or the depression or whatever it is, before you start trying to cope with it, just sit with it for like 5 minutes. And like none of us wanted to volunteer for that. I'm like, that feels so painful. There's no way on the history of the world that I'm going to embrace that feeling for 5 minutes. And, but I had committed myself to like, I'm treating this thing like 2 days. And so I can remember there were techniques and things that coaches wanted me to try in football where I thought like, not sure that's going to work, but you went and tried it. And so, one morning I woke up and it just felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest. Like before my eyes even opened, the anxiety was like kicking my butt already. And so I was trying to figure out like, what the heck is going on? And so I said, man, Michelle said to just sit in it for 5 minutes. So I'm just going to sit in this for 5 minutes. And when I did that, it kind of took the fear out of it. Cause I'm like, okay, like I lived, so like I didn't do something crazy, like the world didn't end. It was 5 minutes. And then I can kind of like go to what these different coping mechanism things were. And then that also allowed me to not to get in this place of panic so much when these things would flare up, because I knew that I could find my peace in it and then be able to then get to the place where I can use my coping skills or reach out. There was like 3 dudes that I met that we text each other almost every other day. Like since we left that place like a couple years ago. and we'll get to some of this later. But we all knew each other's routines, and so I could just text them and go like, "Man, I'm having a tough day," and then they just start going, "Okay, like, how are you eating? Are you getting your exercise in? Are you listening to the music you listen to? Like, are you getting your walks in? All these other kind of things." And like, we'll talk about it later. But like, one of my triggers was when they go like, "How are you eating?" If I told them I was getting most of my food through Uber Eats, that was a trigger that something wasn't quite right, because I'd like to cook my own food. I'm not the world's greatest cook. I just eat chicken and vegetables and oatmeal for breakfast every day. That's just about it. Like, I don't need like gourmet food. I just need food. And so, but when I start ordering like Uber Eats a lot, that's a trigger to me that like something's not quite right. And so then I have to go through like my little checklist to figure out, what's going on and what's happening.
There's a guy named Christopher Germer, and he would call that sort of behavior one of your unfavorable selves. That's how you avoid pain. Mm-hmm. And he has this mantra that I always remember, and it's a mantra you guys should take away with you. And the first part of this mantra is, this is a moment of suffering. Suffering is a normal part of this world, and millions of people have suffered before me. Millions of people are suffering with me, and millions of people will continue to suffer. And the last part is, may I be kind to myself and embrace this moment of suffering.
Yeah, I think I love those types of things because it creates like a visual for me. I'm a kind of a visual learner that kind of way. And I love things like that I can lean back on. And it's every time I find something like that, or I'm always reading about mental health. I don't have a license or anything, but I feel like I've become a licensed therapist because I read a lot, talk to you a lot about it. And but I love like those little things that you can give people to kind of lean on to kind of prop themselves up in those tough times. Are there any other things that you can think of, Nick, that's like that?
Yeah, I mean, everything Derek's talking about is a part of mindfulness as a broader concept, and mindfulness has really entered the mental health sphere over the last probably 20 years, and it's kind of funny that it took that long, because the reality is that so much of our struggle comes from resisting the experience we're having, resisting the feeling of depression, resisting the feeling of embarrassment or shame or grief. And so mindfulness is all about what you were talking about, like just sit with it for 5 minutes. Just feel it, let it flow. Instead of trying to put that wall up, or instead of trying to react off that feeling, just breathe through it. Mm-hmm. And that's what that mantra is all about. There's another pretty common practice that they have in mindfulness. It's called the RAIN technique. R stands for recognize. So you recognize when you're having a feeling, so you can kind of take a step back from it. You investigate it. Okay, what's this about? What's happening right now? Or I guess that's, I'm spelling rain wrong. The A comes first. I think that's awareness, and then investigation, and then the N is non-judgment. So you really take a moment to step back, take a breath. Don't make a judgment call on what this feeling is, what it says about you, but get curious about what's going on. And, if you, like you're saying, take a few minutes to breathe through it, it takes away some of the bite and intensity of that emotion. And then you can choose to respond in a more emotionally intelligent way rather than reacting impulsively.
Yeah. When I think about that, I'm the analogy dude. I just want you to know that. I think about when you stub your toe at night and you grab it because you want to hold the pain, like, oh God, that thing hurts. But it feels better when you let it go and just let the pain work through your toe. And it's painful for a little bit, but then eventually it kind of leaves your toe. You may have a bruise and have to ice it the next day and all that kind of stuff. But when I think about like how we hold the pain sometimes, and that pain is what makes it more painful. And so I think about stubbing my toe, and you just grab it and you just want that pain to go away. And it seems like the tighter you hold it, the more pain it produces. But when you let it go, it just kind of works through and does it that way. Well, I think this idea around mental illness and health and wellness, to me, like I said, it was one when I think I heard it on someone else's podcast, but it really I was just like, whoa, like I talk about this in such broad terms. And then that kind of really helped me understand, like there is little nuances between the different ones, because like I said, driving down here today, I was feeling a little bit anxious, but it wasn't like was a healthy anxiousness. You know, it wasn't like it was a paralyzing anxiousness. I mean, it's like we're talking about up here. Before games, I would tape my hands and fingers and wrists and ankles and everything. And then if I went out to warm up and I didn't break a sweat and I felt cold, I'd come back into the locker room and tell the trainer to cut off all the tape, and I'd retape everything. And then the trainer would go, because I was feeling anxious that my body wasn't responding the right way. And the trainers would go like, well, you can't keep wasting the tape. And I'm like, well, we can waste tape or I can play like crap. Like, which one do you want? Like I think we'd rather waste tape and let me get retaped so I feel like I'm in my zone, like going into the game. And so I do think that,
you were actually using mindfulness, right? Because you wanted that fight or flight system to happen so you could get pumped up, right?
Yeah, and that's the other thing too about this whole mindfulness thing too, is that I can remember maybe 2010 or 12, I was in Charlottesville, Virginia, working for UVA football team, and I was still having some of these issues, and I went to this therapist who practiced mindfulness, and it just felt like the most hippie-ish, like you know what I'm saying, like man, we're gonna just go walk through the high grass and smoke weed or something other, like. And I was just like, I'm like, I don't know, man, this is not quite working for me like right now. And then I found that the only way I could get myself into a headspace to practice mindfulness is there was this one little dirt road that led to like this lake, and I would drive down that road, pull over to the side, and just sit in my car. And that's the only way I could get myself into it, because otherwise I could hear the TV or hear the dog bark or hear someone talking. Like, I get so distracted by it. And so it's kind of funny, like I hear some of my friends, they talk about how they talk about mindfulness or therapy and stuff, and they make it sound like when people start to ridicule it, that to me is a signal that they're trying to deny their own struggles that they're having. And so you hear this side, when you hear mindfulness, it's like, oh, like everything feels good. It looks, the wind is beautiful and the golden grass and blah, 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 blah. And, but man, like you can get yourself into a place where, like you said, you can manage this stuff and be able to, get past it and move forward. So I think it's when you said mindfulness, it just made me think about some of those stories, because I was just like, man, this dude is kind of crazy. Like, what is he talking about? Like, I don't know. Like, give me some meds or something. Like, I don't know if this is going to work for me. But it does work.
Well, and it's funny that you say that about, this is all about just feeling good and, this hippie perspective. And it's actually, I think if you're actually practicing mindfulness, you're feeling a lot of difficult emotions. It's not just a feel good Zen meditation moment. It's I am allowing myself to feel this, and it doesn't feel great right now. But I'm allowing myself to feel this because this is my reality right now, and I'm going to radically accept that and allow myself to go through this process so that I can get to the other side. And once I do that, I can make some better choices.
You're reminding me of when I was a practicing therapist and I was working with my patients. I'd always find myself getting into this trap when I was younger and inexperienced of, so how was your week? And of course they would want to please me, right? And tell me, fine, it's, but that's really not what I want to hear. And if they did say fine, I'd be like, oh no, where am I going to go from here? And once I really, truly learned about mindfulness, I started asking a different question. And that question was, how was your suffering this week? Because that really got them in tune with their suffering at every level, their coping mechanisms, the way they escape from their suffering, and then really gave us a platform of which to paint on and work on. And that I really stretched my career out too, because I was then walking with them with their pain instead of trying to fix them.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think that sometimes when I know friends are struggling, I struggle with what is the question to ask them. Because if you say, how you doing? More than likely they're going to go, they're struggling. They're going to go like, oh, I'm good. How's it going? Like, no, you're not good. Like, something's not right, And so I used to ask people, like, what are you doing? Like, versus how are you doing? And so they tell me like, hey, I'm working on such and such. And then I can get into some conversation. But I like the idea of kind of meeting them in their suffering to kind of understand where they are and how you can maybe show up, in their life or what have you. Well, I think that was I love the conversation around that, because I think really understanding, like I said, the difference between those three things can help you better accept, where you are. And you can also look at those things and go like, oh yeah, like I might be feeling this stress or anxiety or what have you, but that doesn't mean that I have some illness happening. It just could mean that this is something that kind of raises that up in my body. And then you can also have a proactive plan to kind of address your mental health the same way you would address your physical health, and take care of it. And then if you do have if you feel like you are at a place where you need a diagnosis, then I think you can kind of better see that or better understand it. What I want to move to now is this idea around, with the holidays coming up and all of the different emotions and things it drums up, and, how to kind of manage some of that kind of stuff. And, I've been divorced since about 2010. And so I spend a lot of the holidays and things, by myself. Some of it was by choice. Other it was because they were like, hey, we ain't trying to deal with you. But man, it can be lonely sometimes. And then it can also be stressful because it drums up different, like I would see pictures of my family, and that would like drum up some other kind of emotion. Or you could be with family, and some of the chaos that brings kind of creates some stuff. And so like for myself, I have like these three different things, and then you guys can kind of put a more, a different spin on it, but I call it knowing your no's. Like you got to know what to say no to, and that might mean that you have to skip a party, or you excuse yourself from a group that that's kind of gonna drum up the stress or what have you. For me, sometimes it's kind of funny, but it's not funny. But when me and my kids get together, we like to play Monopoly, and it is the most intense, sometimes physical. Like really high intensity game of Monopoly you've ever seen in your life. And so sometimes I got to read the room and go like, no, I'm not playing Monopoly today, because I know it's going to end up being a big, huge battle. And then that's going to impact, me spending my time with the kids. And then that's going to have an impact on my mental health. And so you got to know your no's. And then the other one is stick to your anchors. So like having those habits and those routines that kind of help you reset are important. And like knowing when you're out of those routines, what the triggers are that let you know that you're out of those routines. And then the other one is choose connection over perfection. And so a lot of times during the holidays, it's like we're trying to find the perfect gift, the perfect outfit, the perfect meal, the perfect party, the perfect, all these different things. And it should be about the connection more. And so that's why it's important to read the room when we're playing Monopoly. Because if we're in a good space, we connect really well over Monopoly. If we're not, then I've had the table flipped over, like all kinds of stuff. Like even if I always try to get the 2 blue states or the 2 blue properties. And if I'm not playing as if I'm trying to get the 2 blue properties, everyone will just stop playing.
Boardwalk and Park Place.
Yeah. They're just like, Dad's not really playing. He's not really engaged with us because he's not trying to get those 2 properties. And so I have to always be trying to get those 2 properties. Otherwise, no one will play. And so I think those 3 things, knowing your no's, sticking to your anchors, and choosing connection over perfection are ways to kind of think about your game plan going into the holidays. Now, you guys may have different phrases for those, like boundaries or whatever it is. What are some tips or things you can think about to give that?
Yeah, the holidays are so hard because we put so much pressure on ourselves when it comes to the holidays. We have this like 1950s idea of what they're supposed to be, an idea that probably never actually ever really happened. That Bing Crosby kind of a snow falling outside. Yeah, and so there's a lot of pressure, and then there's a lot of room for all that family stuff to come up, and every family has stuff that comes up. And it's funny when I work with clients. The holidays, there's always a bit of a juggle with schedules because it's Thanksgiving or it's Christmas, the day we normally have our session. We can reschedule, and my clients typically fall into 2 categories. One is like, oh, you know what, I'll be fine without a session this week. It's the holidays. I'm with my family. And then the other group is, I absolutely have to have a session this week because it's the holidays and I'm with my family.
Right.
And so, you know, I think the first thing you're talking about is exactly it. Is you go in with a plan. You know, knowing where's the most likely place where I'm going to run into some struggle here. Is it going to be a specific topic at the dinner table? Is it going to be, you know, being way too overwhelmed, being around people all day long? Is it, so you got to go, okay, what are the areas I typically struggle? What are my needs in those areas? And then how can I ask for what I need in a self-compassionate way?
Damn, that's good. What do you think about, Nick, like for those people that are really worried about going in and being sort of, you know, re-traumatized, you know, that maybe deal with some spiritual trauma over the holidays? Maybe you can talk a little bit about spiritual trauma and just some different things that certain people worry about. Is it okay to not go to that event? And what are some different coping strategies?
Yeah, I think first off, yes. The answer is yes. If you can sincerely look at yourself and say, hey, this is just not going to be good for me, then you gotta ask for what you need, and in this case, you know, declare what you need. You know, the reality is there's a lot of stuff tied up in the holidays, whether it's, you know, family drama or family trauma, or, you know, religious ideals that people may or may not still buy into. And so, you know, if you're looking at the situation and you go, there's no way that I'm going to be able to negotiate a way for this to work and be healthy for me with my family this year, then you absolutely can take a break this year. You know, I've had some experience with this myself. You know, I came from a religious family, and I'm not particularly religious these days. And I remember, you know, I came out of the closet at about 21 years old, and it was a really big struggle for my family. And they've come a very long way, but for a number of years, it was a struggle. And you know, there were a period of time where there was absolutely no way that my family was going to be okay with me bringing anybody home at all. Over time, you know, that loosened up a little bit. You know, they realized that, I mean, talk about picking connection over perfection. They realized that they wanted connection over some ideal. But, you know, there was a point where I had to set some boundaries, you know, as I was beginning to bring a partner home. And I said, you know, if there's going to be some issues here, I'll just rent a hotel and we'll just come visit. And that was about the time that things shifted, and they realized, you know what, this is our son. We're bringing him in, and it's a whole different world now. But I did have to have that moment of, okay, what do I need, and what's going to feel safe for me? And you know, when we talk about boundaries are not about controlling other people.
Right.
It's not about trying to get something from them. It's about declaring what I am going to do. And so, you know, if this is going to be an issue, if this is how you're going to respond, then I'm just going to go get a hotel. And that's okay. You know, it may not be the picture perfect thing that is expected, but if it honors what you're needing and you can take care of yourself, that's what really matters.
Self-compassion.
Self-compassion.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, it's really important. Not that you have to train the people around you, but you have to keep standing up for yourself in a way that they start to realize that it ain't about them, that it's about you and what you need. Like that, it was really hard for me to tell people that because I'm the dude I show up for everybody. Like, hey, you need something at midnight, call me. I'll be there. But then it came to where I'm like, no, I can't be there. And so it was hard for me to say that, you know, because it felt like I was letting them down. But then I had to just keep standing up for myself in a way that people started to realize, like, okay, this is not about me. This is what Ray needs, you know. And so I had when I lived back in Virginia, I grew up in Asheville, North Carolina, which is about a 5-hour drive from Charlottesville. And so I can remember I was going home for Thanksgiving, and I called my pastor and I said, hey man, like, I'm about to go home for Thanksgiving. I have 3 older sisters, full of drama. Just straight drama. And I mean, my family history is interesting, but and I'm like, I don't know if I want to go home. And he goes like, well, just go home, put some boundaries and time around, you know, what you're going to spend with your sisters, And then if there's a situation that comes up, feel free to just leave, Ray. Like you don't have to fix everybody or do things or show up for people. Like you can take care of yourself. And so that's what I did. And that for the first time, I went home, and then when all the drama would drop, and then would kind of, because I don't know if you guys are like have siblings, but when you get home, like everyone kind of falls back into the pecking order that you were in as a little kid. And so like, you know, even though I'm bigger than all my sisters, as soon as I walk in the house, my oldest sister is the top dog. And so like whatever she wants to do, whenever she wants to do it, however she wants to do it, that's what happens. And sometimes you're like, but I don't want to do it that way, you know? And then my middle sister is just a tough case to deal with. And she'll just drum up all this past history stuff that then makes you just, you know, you go back to these places.
It's like you're stuck in time.
Yeah, exactly. And then my youngest sister is the one that's kind of like, I ain't dealing with y'all. Like, I'm up out of here. So I attach myself to her. And I'm like, if she feels like that she needs to get out of here, that's probably a good idea that I need to get out of here too. And so that's kind of the way I had to work it, just so I could navigate, like, you know, when I get back in those situations, thinking about, you know, I had like, and I talked about this in the first episode. My parents were alcoholics, and my dad was like physically abusive, and all those types of things. And so I had to, when I get with my sisters and we start talking about our childhood, that's where my mind goes, and then it kind of puts me in this really weird place. And so I had to really figure out how to navigate, you know, all of that when we got together in times like that, because inevitably those conversations are going to come up. And so then I have to kind of figure out how to work through a lot of those kinds of things. And I just didn't want to be in their drama, in that headspace, and then trying to be like, hey, how's it going? Like, hey, great turkey, happy, you know, whatever it is, you know? And so I needed a game plan to get out of that. And so, you know, thinking that through and thinking about myself in those moments versus thinking about how other people are going to perceive me or what they thought about me not being there or leaving in the heat of the moment or whatever it is. I just had to let that be their junk, and then I could deal with my own stuff that way.
I think the key word is planning. I mean, Jessica and I, we go down to Oregon for Thanksgiving, every Thanksgiving. That's my wife and my family. But, you know, there's bound to be issues that come up. The thing is the plan. So we spend that car drive thinking about, okay, what are some of the things that can come up, are going to come up, and how are we going to react, or how are we going to maintain our poise and control, and how are we going to manage our own expectations on what we want to have, you know, at this holiday event, and, you know, how are our family members' expectations going to interact with us. So giving yourself that time to really plan and think about it is key.
Yeah, and you know, one of the other things that we talked about here too is this idea around connection. So this year, I was spending time with my girlfriend and her family, and it was just weird because I was just like, man, like I don't really feel connected to her family that way, you know? And so then all of a sudden I was yearning for being connected to my family, you know, and my kids. And so I kind of took myself out of the situation for a little bit, but then I went called my sons, was like, hey, like, what are you guys doing later tonight? Let's just get together, like bring some leftover food or the video games, or my kids are huge, by the way. Like my oldest son is about 6'1" and about 260 pounds. My middle son is about 6'8", and he used to be 340 pounds, but he's about 240 pounds. Now he's taking care of his body. My youngest son is about 6'6". He plays football at Portland State, and he's about 310. And so when we get together, it's like, hey, we get to wrestle dad day, you know? And so I was like, I don't know if I want to do that, but I need to be with my kids. You know what I'm saying? I wanted that connection. So it didn't matter if we had food or the video games or whatever. And yes, we started wrestling, and yes, I got bent and twisted all up and all kinds of stuff, and had to go like, yeah, you win, you know, which is hard to do as a dad, you know. And but I needed the connection, and I didn't need to be around the kitchen table or the turkey or whatever it was. I just needed to be with my kids so I could feel that connectedness. And so it wasn't the most perfect situation in my little 1-bedroom apartment and those big, huge bodies. But it was the perfect connection for me in that situation.
But in that moment with your girlfriend, I mean, you took inventory of kind of where you're at and what you needed. So
yeah,
reaching out to your boys was key.
Yeah, absolutely. And like there was a little bit of guilt, because I'm like, man, like I'm at this. I don't want people to think like, man, he doesn't like us, and walked out. But that's not what was happening. It was just like I needed the connectedness to my kids in those moments, because I was starting to kind of go down that thing of, oh man, you're a terrible dad, terrible husband. Look at all this stuff you've done, blah 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 blah. And now you're not with your family on the holidays. Like I was going right to that place, and that would have put me in the darkness for at least 3 or 4 days. I would have been in the dark on the couch, curled up, depressed, anxious, and all the stuff would have been flooding back in. And but I just had to catch myself in the moment and go like, I need to get what I need in this moment. And sorry if you perceive it a certain way, but I just this is what I need. And so it worked out for me, for everybody. It worked out better for it because I had spent a lot of fun time with my kids, and then I was able to go back to my girlfriend's house and have a good time with her and her family and all that kind of stuff. So it kind of unlocked me for the day for all those different things. So it is important to have some of this stuff, a plan in place. And I would say not just for the holidays. I'm just saying, period. Like just know like who you need to reach out to, who can respond to things, who tends to be the person or the activity or event or whatever it is that you do, go for a walk, run, work out, whatever it is. Like just know, like at least have a plan that, so like when I start to feel these things, here are some things I can go to versus going, I'm feeling these things, now what? Because if you get to the now what, that just tends to go further into the darkness. And so having a plan just in general, not just for the holidays, but just having one in general is a good thing to do.
Yeah, and I think you're illustrating a really great point, which is that a lot of this work in mental health is about learning about yourself. You had learned at that point, like, okay, I know what's going on. I know my own tendencies. And if I continue down this path, I'm going to be out of it for 3 days. But I know what I need right now, so I'm gonna ask for that. And I think that's a huge key, is that like we all do have tendencies like that. I have a doctor who once told me, she says, Nick, I expect a phone call from you every November because the sun goes away and your seasonal depression kicks in. And I was like, oh wow, you're right. And so I know every year as we get to November, I have to be really good about my mental wellness, which is I've got to be really, really, consistent with my workouts. I've got to eat a certain way. I've got to, I know now how to step in and intervene there before those tendencies would just kick in and control me. And so, you have to do some self-exploration.
Yeah.
How do I tend to react? And then you can do that, for the holidays with your family. Like, what are the dynamics? How do we tend to do with certain things or certain environments? When is the time to play Monopoly and when is not?
Exactly. Yeah.
What's going to trigger you?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's the thing is we all have that. And, and one thing I tell my clients a lot is that your family's really good at pushing the buttons because they made the buttons.
Right.
And so, like you're saying, you go home and all that, you feel like you're a teenager in the house again instead of like a fully formed adult. And so you have to kind of recognize that and, recognize your own tendencies, recognize your families. And, like you're saying, there's sometimes guilt that comes along with asking for what you need or doing what you need to do, but you have to, let them know this isn't about you. I just need to take a break.
Yeah. I will say too, being proactive hasn't always been my mode of operation. The first person I interviewed on the podcast was Doug Baldwin. And it was really interesting because
Beautiful interview, by the way.
Well, thank you. But I know that Doug has so much thought into everything that he says that he's not going to just say something just for the sake of filling the airspace. And so we were talking about this whole mental health thing, and he made told the story about when he knew that his retirement was coming, that he started already trying to reshape his thoughts and how he goes about doing things, because in football you can solve a lot of problems physically. Like you can go back to the weight room and lift all the weights, or if you're like me, like this is like people used to ask, why do you fight all the time? I got kicked out of so many practices and football games for fighting, because that's how I would solve like whatever was going on in my life. And so just to digress a little bit, because it's kind of a funny story. But when I went to college, it was my very first year at Virginia. I was a defensive end. I should have been a defensive end forever, but they moved me to tackle, but offensive tackle. But I was a defensive end, and I was fighting all the offensive linemen all the time. And so then I got kicked out of practice one time, and I thought that I had lost my scholarship. I didn't know. I'm like, man, like I tried to run back on the field. Coach kicked me out again. I'm just like, oh, man, did I lose my scholarship? I had no idea. But then they called my dad and was like, why does this dude fight all the time? And my dad was like, I don't know. I'm like, well, it's because of you. No. but I fought all the time. And because that was just kind of my way of expressing whatever the junk was in my system, I would just fight. And then I got kicked out of maybe like 7 NFL football games, and that comes with fine money. And I remember I was playing in Detroit, 2 seconds left in the game, and I got kicked out of the game for fighting. John Randall took a cheap shot at our quarterback, boom, and I punched him in the face. 2 seconds, get kicked out of the game. So that's automatic fine. And I got home to Detroit that night, and my wife, or ex-wife at the time, all 5'4" of her, I opened the door, and she was standing there, and she said, let somebody else take it for the team. like stop getting these fines. And so I'm like, yes, ma'am. And so that was the last time I got a fine. But fighting was my way of dealing with that stuff. And so then all of a sudden you're retired, and you're having this thing boiling up inside, or maybe there's frustration with you and your wife and your kids and stuff. Well, you can't turn to the fighting then, or you're going to be, in cuffs and in the police car somewhere. And so when Doug was like, I realized that I was going home to, I think he has 2 or 3 daughters and a wife, a house full of women. And he's like, so I can't go express myself physically that way when things come up. So I had to do some work on myself before I retired. And all of a sudden it went off in my head like, wow, like I never thought of this mental health thing being proactive in it. It's always been a reaction. Like, oh, I'm feeling this way. Let me go get something. Let me figure out how to deal with it, versus going like, I may be going into something that's going to cause me to feel a certain way. So let me be proactive in attacking that.
Yeah, and it's just like the holidays or retirement. I mean, because the reality is we know that retirement, it has a tendency to people tend to get depressed shortly after they begin to retire, and especially men who are so used to their identity being tied to their profession. And so when you look at, okay, this is coming, there's going to be some challenges. How do I prepare for that ahead of time? How do I be proactive about it?
Yeah.
Doug was so good in that interview because, he was anticipating some of his grief from loss of football, some of the grief entering this new environment with his family. I was so impressed. And, one of the things he also talked about was, I think he referred to postpartum depression for men, didn't he, on that? Which I thought, holy smokes, which is out there. And he put it out there in a very visible way. So important. So yeah, very, very thoughtful interview.
Yeah, it was. And so, I mean, and for me, like, I think, today, like, what we're wanted to get accomplished with this episode is to kind of think about your mental health proactively versus been a reaction all the time. Sometimes, obviously, it's a reaction to things, but to be proactive about it, to think about it, to have a plan for it. If you need to include people in your plan, like I said, there's it's actually 2 guys that I was in this residential place with up in Manchester, Michigan. One lives in L.A. and the other one lives in Dallas. And it doesn't matter what time of the night it is. We know that we can reach out to each other, and then once a month we get on a Zoom call and we just do a visual check-in, that kind of stuff. And so they are part of my plan, and so that I know that when something's not quite right, I can reach out and then they can recenter me. Sometimes by just asking me the questions like, how are you eating? What do you listen to? Are you getting your workout? It'll kind of get me reset into my routine. So think about those types of things, not just like, like I'm depressed, I need to call the therapist or whatever. But there's other things and people in your life that you can make part of your plan to kind of mitigate some of that stuff. And then I think it's also too, when you were talking about the rain bill, and there's one part about investigating. And when I think about investigating, sometimes when we ask ourselves those types of questions, we're kind of hard on ourselves. And so I try to reframe it as saying, just be curious. Because something about curiosity is less threatening than asking yourself a hard question, what's going on? Because then your answer to that just seems to be a little bit more intense and harmful for me in that moment. But if I'm like, I would have these times when I would tell my kids, coming over to the house, over to your mom's house to play video games or whatever. And I would get up and I literally could not turn the knob on the door to go out the door. And I would just beat myself up right there at the door and then turn around, curl up, cry on the couch, call my ex-wife, tell the kids I'm sick, I can't make it. And but then when I went to the therapy in Michigan, the therapist was like, why don't you just be curious in those moments? And it was something about the word curiosity that just kind of took all the judgment that this, like what you're saying, out of it. And so then I could just go like, okay, what am I feeling right now? And why might I be feeling this? And a lot of times it was based on like, hey, I'm about to go into this environment again where it's my ex-wife and my kids, and it's going to feel like family again, but it's not. And then if something doesn't go quite right, I have to leave. And then that just brought me like all this anxiety and panic to where I couldn't get out the door. And so just being able to be curious about it and just thinking about it as curiosity allowed me to take the energy and the power out of it in a way that I could it almost felt like as if I was sitting it down on the table and looking at it versus looking at myself in it and judging myself.
Because it's the shame and the judgment that paralyzes you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, after I got through it, there was this little joke, for a career. Like, I mean, I bench pressed like 500 pounds, squat 600, 700 pounds, block 300-pound men for a living, and I couldn't turn a freaking 1-pound doorknob. Like the doorknob was kicking my butt like all the time. And it was just like, so like even when I went to, and we'll wrap it up here, but even when I went to treatment in Michigan, I said, the number one goal I have here is to step outside every day. I'm going to turn the doorknob, and even if I just stand on the porch, I'm going to open the door and stand there every day for 32 days. I'm going to open the door. And so the way this house is built, it had these 6 different suites in it. And my suite just happened to have a door that went to this little family room, a door that went to the interior door that went like to this other little room, an interior door that went to my bathroom that had 2 double doors. And so every night, I'm closing all the doors and blah, blah, blah. And I'd wake up and all the doors would be open. And I'm just like, man, this is weird. Like, am I getting up in the middle of the night and opening all these doors? And so then one day we're in our group session. I was like, hey, man, this weird thing is happening. They're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, I close these doors every night. And every morning I wake up, every single one of these doors is open. And so this one guy, Samoan dude, was like, well, Big Ray, when you first came here, you said you had a hard time opening doors. And so I get up in the morning and I open all the doors for you. Mm-hmm. And I was so just sweet. Like, these are like football players, you know what I'm saying? Like big, tough, gritty dudes. And I just wanted to give the dude a big hug, but he didn't seem like a hugger. You know what I'm saying? So I was just like, I gave him the thumbs up. But those are like the little battles I would have with myself. And it was this idea around when I would get stuck at the door, learning to be curious about what I was feeling and thinking, because it kept me from a lot of things. Like I tell NASA all the time, like on the broadcast team, during those times, I would call NASA and be like, man, I'm coming in hot, which means I'm running late. That's because I had to talk myself out the door, talk myself down the steps, talk myself to the car, talk myself to the first stoplight, talk myself to the 520, talk myself across the bridge. Like I was talking myself all the way to the studio or all the way to the stadium because I was struggling just trying to get out of the door. And the judgment part of it is what was paralyzing me. And so the curiosity helped me pull all of that judgment out and be able to kind of see what was going on, give an answer to it, or separate the fact from the fiction, and then be able to get in my car and get to the studio. So I want to just say thank you guys for showing up. I want to thank Nick and my man Derek for showing up. Derek's wife is Jessica. And one time I slipped up and I said, Derica. And so now it's hard for me to say Derek without saying Derica.
We're like Bennifer. Yeah.
So it's kind of funny. So I had to like slow it down a little bit. But I want to thank you guys in the Mindful Therapy Group for sponsoring the podcast, for coming on and sharing with us a little bit today. This is the first time that we're trying this, so we're trying to work out the kinks and the flow and all that kind of stuff. We hope to do it again. We thank you guys for showing up, and for the Seahawks for having us, for NASA for doing the producing. And I want to end the show the way we always end it, with our three things. One is that it is okay to not be okay. And then number two is that if you're suffering or experiencing a mental health crisis, reach out to your medical provider for guidance on how to do that. And number three is that if you need help and you ask for help, you're operating from a position of power, because it takes power and courage to ask for help. And so thank you again for being on. Big Ray's Garage Grind. Peace.